for communities. Together we make a difference. Both of our panelists tonight were awarded honorary doctorate degrees by CSUB at our commencement ceremonies last spring. This is the highest honor that we award to our community members and reflects the lifetime of service, commitment, and excellence that these two men represent. We are very grateful to the Ravi and Naina Patel Foundation for their generous support of the Mahatma Gandhi Fellowship for Social Entrepreneurship, and that is enabling our gathering tonight. I also want to thank Teltech Communications for their generous support for the refreshments this evening. Doctors Chavez and Clayton serve as an inspiration to us all. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and I now invite Dean Course back to the podium to introduce our esteemed guests.
Thank you, Provost Stiern. We got a little late start, but I wanted to insert, I'm a marketing professor before I became a dean, and so I'm going to insert a quick ad. And that's because we have an audience of folks and filming for students interested in public service and nonprofit organizations. I'd like to introduce our department chair of our Public Policy and Administration Department, Dr. Jinping Soon. I want to reiterate that that's really exciting. We're going to be offering the Bachelor's of Arts in Public Administration online as a 2-year completion program for our community college partners. This is going to really serve adults in our more rural communities having access to a degree that will help them move up in the organizations they work in. So thank you so much, Dr. Now let's get to the real show. Dr. Paul Chavez, son of renowned civil rights and labor leader Cesar Chavez, has dedicated his life to advancing his father's mission of social justice, farm workers' rights, and community development. He led the Cesar Chavez Foundation for more than 30 years, ensuring his father's legacy continues to benefit future generations, and even after retiring in 2023, continues to serve on the board of directors. At an early age, we can imagine, and if you go to La Paz, if you go to Keene, you can learn about and see photos. At a very early age, Dr. Chavez participated in the so-called family business of civil rights and advocating for laborers, especially in our fields here in McFarland and Shafter and around this area. He held various roles with the United Farm Workers of America. He's known as an effective organizer, a negotiator, and a communicator. He helped expand the work of the foundation, expanding the focus to include affordable housing, access to education, as well as maintaining Cesar's legacy through the National Chavez Center and the National Monument in Keene. We're so delighted to have you here with us tonight. And Dr. Morgan Clayton was born and raised right here in Bakersfield and demonstrated resilience and dedication, starting at age 15 when he lost both parents and yet found a way to navigate and matriculate through Bakersfield High School. He attended Bakersfield College and then founded Teltech Security System, which provides security solutions to thousands of clients for more than 40 years. He's leveraged his success to help others, both through his gifts of time and resources, and he also founded Leaders in Life, an annual student-led, student-driven youth conference, Teens for Teens. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. Inspirational. Dr. Sumita Sarma, Associate Professor of Management and the inaugural Mahatma Gandhi Fellow of Social Entrepreneurship, will serve as our moderator this evening. So, Sumita, I hand it to you.
Okay, thank you so much, dear course. Okay, could you hear me now? Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for showing up. I mean, we have got these two great speakers here today. And once again, we are so grateful and honored to have Dr. Morgan Clayton and Dr. Paul Chavez with us today here in this fireside chat. So let's get started and hear from you.
Sure.
So you have each had fascinating paths to where you sit today. Can you each tell us a little bit about your background and about what led you to this leadership role that you have today? So we can start with Morgan.
Hey. Oh,
Yeah, I
the
think
mic just picks me up. Anyway, let me share with you, first of all, to my brother Paul and Andrea's family, I love them to death. And to all of you, thank you. I think for me, when you think about Bakersfield, my mother and father migrated from Little Rock, Arkansas. My great-grandmother was Chickasaw Indian, and they migrated into Bakersfield. And as headwinds would have it, they just had a tough time coming into Bakersfield. And as a result of it, my brother Michael and I had to ultimately decide how we're going to raise ourselves. He went into the Navy. I basically hit boots on the ground, School of Hard Knocks, BHS driller, went to Bakersfield College. And something interesting happened. And what it boiled down to is I didn't have any money. And as a result of that, I will share this. My beautiful wife, Gloria, I'll bring out a couple of things about her. Her and I have been together since high school. We've been together from boyfriend, girlfriend to now husband and wife for over 50 plus years.
wow.
And she doesn't like to get called out, so I'm just going to do that. So, but here's the special thing of what led me to the leadership piece. When I was walking at BHS and really was very limited on money, I met Gloria when I was under Art Dizell running track. And I would walk her home, and Gloria collected the Kennedy silver dollars, right? And during school, I didn't have money, so she would loan me a Kennedy silver dollar to eat. And from that, her mother and I became good friends. I still owe her for those Kennedys. And basically, our relationship moved from friendship into ownership of marriage of 3 children. And I think the thing that impresses me most about leadership for me was I got to a point where I had 3 children, and I was trying to figure out the best way to keep them safe. And I ran into a lot of obstacles. And those obstacles were when people don't look like you, talk like you, think like you, or sometimes you're raised in a community where people make judgments about you, it's very hard to maneuver. So I'll leave it there because I know Paul has an interesting story, but it was a struggle. My wife brought me to a point of pride, and I moved into a situation of finding my own self-security by starting a company to be able to be independent to take care of my family. That's the big thing.
That's very, very inspiring. Thank you so much, Morgan. Paul, could you share with us?
Yeah. Well, before I begin, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here with Morgan, right?
Yeah.
My upbringing was a little bit different than my friends. You know, when I grew up in Delano, it was during the heart of the farm worker movement and Delano grape strike, and so there was a lot of activity and there was a lot of people coming around and a lot of attention focused on my father, And so, you know, we grew up thinking that that was kind of natural. Well, when I graduated from high school, I just figured that I was gonna go become an attorney and go back and help represent and protect farm workers. And so I remember I was getting ready to enroll or to do my application, and the general counsel for the union, an attorney by the name of Jerry Cohen, a brilliant legal mind, pulled me aside and said, what are you gonna do? And I said, well, I'm gonna work for you, and I think I might even said, and I'm gonna take your job one of these days, right? But he says, you know, maybe you should think about working alongside your dad. And I was like, what? And he says, you know, running a democratic organization takes a lot of skill. You could learn. There's a definite need. And he says, and you can always hire attorneys like me. And so I got to admit that at first I was just like, my world was in a spin because my older brother was an attorney, and that's what I was going to do, right? And so I thought about it, and I said, okay, makes sense. I wasn't sure, but I said, yeah, I trust Jerry. So I remember going to my dad and saying, okay, reporting to duty. And I just figured he was going to send me to a picket line or a boycott, and I'd be in the middle of action. And he promptly assigned me to work in the union's print shop. I'm like, well, what do I know about printing? I don't even care about printing, right? Well, you know, I think in retrospect, I think he put me in there to learn how to work, right? But it was an interesting time because as we were there, I began to read the material that we produced, and I read the union's constitution and kind of understood the underpinnings of a democratic organization. And we printed union convention proceedings where I read about the hopes and aspirations of farm workers. And so it was a really formative time. And so after a while, I was into it, and I was like, I was set, right? And I remember my dad came to me and he says, I'd like you to come work with me in my office. And I was like, oh, no, Dad. Don't you understand that I was born with the ink in my veins? And he says, well, you know, I think you could give us a hand here. And the thing is I think that I was scared. I wasn't sure that I could do that work because I'd never worked in an environment. And so I went and I worked with him, and you know, he urged me, you can do it. And I think he even said, if you don't do well, you can go back to the print shop. So I agreed. And so actually he assigned me to work with, I was the liaison with the nonprofit side of the organization. And I learned a whole set of skills that I didn't even know existed. I mean, I learned about budgeting and planning and how to take notes in meetings and skills that I use throughout my career. And so I did that for a while, and I did pretty well. And after a while, I thought, okay, my life's calling, administrative assistant. And then next thing you know, he says, we're starting a school for union negotiators. You know, there was a lot of success, and they wanted people to sit there and help workers bargain across the table with employers. And I was like, oh, what do I know about that, right? But anyways, he convinced me, and we were in a training program that, I don't know, 16 months and 6 days a week, you know, 8 hours a day, and we had to brush up on our Spanish, and we learned macro and microeconomics and how to cost contracts, and I learned about cost of living indexes and all these things that I never knew existed. But after a while, we graduated, we went out, made some mistakes, but pretty soon we were negotiating, and I became comfortable sitting across the bargaining table. And the thing is that happened many times during my career. After that, I was asked to become the union's political director in Sacramento. I did that for a while, and then I was the head of the marketing department, our social marketing, where we were using direct mail, and I learned about merges and purges, and we were buying lists, and we were visiting evangelical ministers that were using direct mail. And it was an interesting time, right? We installed mainframe computers in a printing plant, and so I was set. And then he came and he asked me to run the nonprofit, which was the National Farm Worker Service Center. And I remember saying, I don't know, what do I know about affordable housing? What do I know about education? You know? And again, he says, you can do it, I have faith in you. And so, you know, I began to realize that he had more faith in me than I had in myself. But it was during that time that I learned that you know, we have a lot to offer. And many times, people around us maybe don't think that we do. But I remember my dad saying, and and this has been a big part of my leadership, is that my dad says, you know, mijo, you're being given opportunities that people go to school for. And he says, and as a boy growing up, I never had those opportunities. Your uncles never had those opportunities. So as you do your work, you're going to be in a position one day where you're going to get to decide who gets to do what. And I want you to promise me that you're going to give that person that never had the opportunity, you're going to give them that opportunity, and do it for me and for your uncle. And so we built an organization based on this idea that everybody has contributions to make. Yes, they may need to be given the training and the education to do it, and then they need to be put in that positive environment to make a change. But he urged me to make sure that we give people opportunities and do it for him and my uncle. And so that's kind of how I base my work. We built an organization where we get young people who are looking for that opportunity, and we train them, and we demand a lot of them. And it's amazing how people respond to the challenge.
Good stuff.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I mean, very inspiring stories. I mean, although different, as you have said, both of your stories are different, but very inspiring, very thought-provoking. And I know that you have made so many hard decisions, maybe during this journey. So can you tell us about a pivotal decision where staying true to your values meant taking a harder path? And what do you think was at stake? Or why, what that decision maybe has taught you, or maybe has cost you? And would you make the same decision or choice now? We can start with Morgan or Paul. Morgan?
That's a tough one. Let Morgan take it.
Well, let me reflect on that and have you participate with something with me. It's around in the 70s, and my brother had gone up to the Navy, and I was still trying to figure out what to do, and I went to work at Clark's Boiler on 5th and Chester, and started dishwashing while I was going and walking to BHS, along with walking Gloria home. On a bicycle that was very interesting. I guess we could call it a lowrider bicycle. But that was, she remember that. It had my little rabbit fur and my speaker, but anyway, those were good times. Well, let me share this with you. I'm going to ask you to participate with me because you guys know this. Everyone talks about power, and power comes from many different perspectives. Native American, African American, Latinos. Everybody has a source of power, and the power comes from your voice. So go with me on this because this was probably the last thing my dad and I probably got a chance to share with regards to the one gift that he gave me. My brother Michael had gotten involved with the Black Panther Party. He was kind of a regional, whatever they call regional. And his goal was to put out the pamphlets and the messages about just simply how to move the Black Panther Party forward. My dad really never bought really into it. He looked at me and says, don't get involved. The message is not the problem, it's the violence. It's just not being able to differentiate. And I said, well, Dad, don't you believe in Black power? Now, this is what he did to me. He said, you know what? Do me a favor, sit down. And I sat down. He says, raise up your hand. You guys got to go with me. Raise up your hand. He says, that's your Black power. Now say it. I said, Black power.
Black power.
Black power. And then he said, turn that hand around. Turn it around. Open it up. What's in it? Nothing. He said, so, I need for you to focus on your education, and I need for you to really think about how you can bring that power to something real. So I was at Clark's Boiler, and I remember a gentleman by the name of Al Haas. He worked for Purina Dog Food Company. He was the vice president of marketing. And my job was simply as a kitchen dishwasher and busboy to keep coffee hot. That was what the Clarks told me to do. I remember one day he came in and he said to me, I don't understand why you work here. I said, I need a job. That's why I work here. He said, no, you don't seem like you should be here. So he came and went many months, and then one day he said to me, can I see your paycheck? Most guys keep your check stubs because you want to show the girl you've got a job. And he said, I said, it was $150. $36 for 2 weeks, and I was making $1.35 an hour and working my tail off. And he looked at me. And so that guy thing came out of me, well, then what do you make? And he looked at me, he says, well, I don't have my check stub, but the next time I come, I'll bring it and I'll show it to you. So he brought it in the next time and he put it down, and it was $10,500. I said, man, do you sell drugs? What do you do? And he looked at me, no, because I've never seen numbers like that. And he said, well, I'm VP of sales for Purina Dog Food, and I get a base salary, and I get something for every bag or dog food that's sold in Stop and Shop markets, Safeway back in the day. I get a couple of pennies off of that, and I get paid commission. And he was educating me on this. I'm like, what in the world? I'm thinking, so we became friends, and he said to me, hey, we got this new marketing campaign. Suburban Propane owns Van Gas, and Van Gas is wanting to move into Tehachapi markets. And what we want to do is hire someone that when they buy a gas tank, we want to give them a free alarm system. And we want you to do that. I go, I got skills, but what kind of skills? He goes to Radio Shack, he buys one of those little transistor radios, and he throws it at me, and he says, can you put this together? I said, man, are you serious? I put it in, I said, you want me to turn it to KUZZ or something? What do you want it on? And he says, I want to hire you. He said, but there's a problem. He said, you'll be the first black that we're hiring with an employee base of over 2,000 people nationally. And I said, whoa. And he said, I said, but I'm up for it because he offered me $10.50 an hour to start. And I didn't know what that number sounded like. But when I got into it, to not take up all the airspace tonight, I started work with a gentleman by the name of Richard Burris. Richard was from the 08. You guys, when I say 08, you know where that is? That's Oildale. And my first time I met with him, he said to me, I'll tell you when to speak, I'll tell you what to say, and don't speak to me unless I talk to you. And I had never had anybody talk to me like that. And I said, well, what does that mean in English? And so we got along pretty well. But then, how many of you guys remember Larry Little from West High? He was like their national wrestler. Him and Richard hung out together. And he said to me, hey, what is the one thing that, black people don't like? I said, well, I don't know about all black people, but I don't like snakes. And I don't care what it looked like. I said, I have dreams of them kissing me. I can't hang with that. And so they went out somewhere, and they put gopher snakes in my apartment. The mail chute, they opened up the mail chute and put gopher snakes in and scared the living, anyway, I called the people to come out and pick up the snakes, and they said, well, just take a broom and brush them. I said, dude, I don't even go in the house. So that experience, and where it brought me to was ultimately getting to a point where I was experiencing problems, and the problem was I had no one to go to. Al was my best friend, and ultimately what got me into was a situation where in 1975, I became a supervisor and I had a crew. And we became #1 in the country for production. And they wanted to know how I did it. Now, I'll tell you guys how I did it. It's the funniest thing in the world. You guys remember McDonald's? Everybody knows when you buy a McDonald's hamburger in Bakersfield, Fresno, LA, they make them all the same. So in my mind, I said, well, what if we bought all of our product the same, bought our cabling the same, and we were able to get the price down and buy it. And we were able to make a couple of $1 million that year in profit. So what happened was they said, hey, you're going to get a big check for that. You can take that home to the wife and do all this stuff. And I said, I'm excited. And they flew in, IBM guys, the Hughes brothers flew in, landed their beautiful jet, and they brought me, they said, what do you want? I said, well, the only thing I've ever done is experience the pepper mill in Fresno, when we used to go through there and get a hamburger. And they said, well, what do you want? I said, well, take me to get a hamburger. And they laughed at me, a hamburger. And it really kind of bothered me. And I was like, did I say something wrong? And they went and got a burger and gave it to me, but I never got anything from it. So I talked to Al about it, and I said, Al, wow. And what happens, I started pivoting, and so this is what happened. I went and to accelerate the story, I went and decided, prayed about it, got with my wife, got with her cousin, started taking my license studies. I got my contractor's license. And something happened. I basically gave them my resignation to start my own company, and they said that I stole from them. And I got accused of stealing at a felony level. And so I didn't know what to do. I talked to my wife about it. I was scared to death because I was going to lose everything. And I had my wife and my children. And so many of you may have not know the name Gabe Solomon. But Gabe Solomon was a black attorney here, very, very astute attorney. And I went to him at his office and I said, look, I don't have any knowledge about this. I got a high school education, a couple of years at BC, Bakersfield business classes. And he looked at me and says, wait a minute. He says, you're the only black working for the organization. I go, yeah. So you walked into American Jeweler, you're the guy doing the security, and they say you stole all this stuff. Yeah. Long story short, he cleared the entire case. It was a fraudulent case. I got my freedom. I started my company. Here's the amazing grace I'll end it on because I want to make sure I hear Paul's story. 45 years later, I get a phone call in my office. Susanna knows this. She's my assistant. And basically, the gentleman says, I'd like to speak to Morgan. And for the sake of privacy, I won't tell you his name because he's still alive. He's in his late 90s with cancer. He said, can you and I meet in Mexicali? I was scared to death because I didn't know, is this going to blow back on me, right?
Yeah.
So we met at Mexicali, and I'll just say his first name's Dick. And he was the CEO of the corporation at that time, multi-billion-dollar corporation. And he said, I want you to know something. He said, ever since what happened to you, I couldn't sleep. I've been bothered by what happened to you, and I'm here to apologize to you on behalf of the corporation. All the people that you dealt with are dead. They're all gone. I'm the only one left. And I sat there in Mexicali, and I looked at him, and I said, thank you. You've lifted a big burden off of me because I didn't know what I did wrong. He said, you did nothing wrong. He said, it was just a sign of the times. And then I said, are you making your penance right? I said, well, you know, what are you doing with this? And he just said, I just need to clear my conscience. And so that's the thing that I'll share with you that taught me all things work together for good. And it's just one of those experiences, and I don't talk a lot about it because when you see, I don't know if you define it as racism or hatred, I just call it just bad behavior that you need a good spanking. But the bottom line of it was it transformed me to listen to what people say and listen to their words. And then I'll leave it with this. There are two kinds of people. There's a worldly kingdom, a worldly mindset, and a kingdom mindset. And I tell people it's not a religious focus. It's a behavior focus. It's a way of how you treat. If you Google or look up those two topics, certainly it leads you into your faith, whatever your faith might be. But you want to have a kingdom mindset when you're dealing with people because worldly people will hurt you and take from you. And what I've learned from that is to listen to the words and try to listen to kingdom words. And I now pivot to my brother Paul. There you go.
Very, very inspiring. Thank you so much for that. I'm just curious, for all those 45 years, did you really have some burden on you?
Yeah, because imagine if you're the only person that's African American. I couldn't go to, a doc or to Ken and say, hey, this doesn't make any sense to me. And like my dad was gone. I mean, I couldn't, so I had nowhere to go. So what I took out of it was they hated me. And I did everything I could to stay away from them. But what Gabe said to me was, I'll never forget this, when he called me in and says, well, I called New York, and I simply told him simply this: how in the world can one black kid out of 2,000 people go into a place you gave him full trust in, give him all the rights to the vault, and nobody looks at him or sees him or the cameras don't show anything? It's racism. So I'm going to make it public. I'm going to put it out there and let you guys deal with it. And then they said, okay, we're done. It's crazy. Yeah. It takes power for power. But I just learned from that, going back to that dark spot. I've learned that when people who don't look like you or talk like you or their language not be the same, you've got to really take the time and be intentional about showing them more than answering the question, extend to them what I call human kindness, which is to give them a chance to say what they want to say in the way that they want to say it. So I'm good now about speaking up, so don't worry about that part.
Organizations aren't inanimate objects. They reflect the values of the people that lead them and run them. And so some of the things that we've done is we spent a lot of time before looking at opportunities, right? We sat down and we said, what are our core values of this organization? And the core value transcends personalities, it transcends opportunities, it's supposed to guide you when you get to those, whys in the road. It's supposed to help you decide to go this way or that way. And I always thought that it was important to have these clearly identified and understood, because we would be approaching those whys in the road. And so we sat down and we talked about, integrity, doing the right thing even when no one's looking, right? That means you just do it because it's the right thing to do. Don't do it because you're afraid of getting caught, right? The si se puede attitude, this personal and organizational spirit of believing that you can do it, right? Personal and organization, right? The personal, I talked about that, but organization, that this organization can go out there and make a difference and improve people's lives, right? We talked about the double bottom line, doing good and doing well. And we actually stole that from the Mormon church, right? But the idea is that you can do both, right? And then we talked about organization, that you make lasting social change by building a strong, enduring organization, right? That you don't go from one project to the next. You build an organization that if you're housing 10 people today, with the proceeds from this housing project, you can do 15, and for that week you can do 20. You can snowball it. So we set that up. So we had these core values in place, and then we began to take a look at our operations, and we had some ideas about growing it. We were happy with the work that we were doing, but we said that this Latino community had exploded in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and a lot of people that I grew up with no longer worked in the fields. They were working in other areas, and so we understood that the needs went beyond the rural parts of this country. And so we thought that there might be a place for us. So we sat down and we said, well, let's take a look at our operations. And the one that comes to mind is our broadcast. We're public broadcasters, and I'm looking at the crowd here, and I think you all know what radio is. My son was saying, be careful, Dad, if it's young people, they're not gonna know what radios are, right? So anyways, he keeps me on my toes. So anyways, and so we had educational stations, and it was run by volunteers. I'm talking about farm workers that would work all day long, right? Picking oranges, and they would come home, and they would come after work, and they would come in with muddy boots, and they would get in there, and they would sweep the offices, and some would get on the airs, and it was community radio, right? And they went and they worked hard, and they were committed to it, and we would do fundraisers just to keep the lights on, right? And there was committees up and down the Central Valley, and abuelitas making menudo, selling menudo on Sundays in front of the church to give money to Radio Campesina to keep it on the air. So I was very proud of it. Wow. But man, it was just one station, right? By then my dad had passed away, right? And it was up to us to kind of figure out what was going on. And so we had this idea that we had to broadcast across the Southwest, and we should be talking to not hundreds of thousands of people, but millions of people. And so we sat down and we said, we need to go and build this radio network throughout the Southwest. And we looked at it, and we looked at the folks, and we knew that there was going to be satellite technology and new digital technology. And this was like in the mid-90s that all this was happening. And so we had this idea of what we needed to do. But a key part of it was changing the nature of how we ran the radio station. And we sat there, and I remember thinking, those people that have worked so hard to build this thing didn't fit in the plans for the future. We knew that we needed to have professional DJs. We knew that we were going to go out and we were going to fight for market share, and we knew that we were going to be using computer technology, many people with skills, and we would train who we could, but it was going to look different. And I remember going to Woodlake. That's where we had our station. It was an old packing shed that was converted into radio stations, and I remember meeting with about 40 people. And that was the hardest thing I ever did. We sat there, and I talked about the good work we're doing, and I talked about this vision, and then I talked to them about we were going to make some changes. And I basically let them know that we weren't going to need the services anymore. It's terrible, right? Not because they were doing anything wrong, it's just because there was a new direction of the organization. And that's where we looked at the whole idea about those core values of doing good and doing well. We knew that we needed to make some changes because we needed to be able to sell or to do some underwriting. We didn't sell advertising at that time. And that we knew that we needed to do things that would strengthen the organization to take it further. And so I remember we made that decision, and it was hard. But I see people now 30 years later, and they'll remind me that they used to work at the radio station. And then they said, and we tell people, whenever Paul invites you to Red Lobster, don't go because he's going to lay you off. But the thing is that was probably one of the most difficult decisions, because these were our brothers and sisters, people that I grew up with, right? But it was because we knew that we needed to take the organization larger, bigger. But that was a tough decision. And would I do it again? Yeah. I would probably handle it a lot better with the experience that I have, but ultimately I would make the same decision, because at the end of the day, the idea is how do you build a strong organization to address the growing needs of a growing community.
That's it.
Yeah, that's thanks for sharing so much. And I think you have already partly answered the question that I'm about to ask you, Paul, because you have so successfully carried on Caesar's legacy through education and community development. So can you talk to us how you continue this work today? As I said, you have already touched on it a little bit. And how do they differ from these new challenges? I mean, we have seen technologies such as Gen AI. You have also talked about having DJs and keeping up to date with technology. And how do you think they also seem to be the same as before?
Well, my father's best known for his organizing and strikes and the grassroots organizing, but when he began his work, he understood that it would take more than a union to address the needs of farm workers and working people. See, he understood that after a long, hard day's work in the fields where you're working in terrible conditions and miserable pay, that people would go home to a whole different set of problems. Yeah. The lack of affordable housing, educational opportunities for our children, access to health care, fair consumer credit. So he knew that it would take a movement to address those things. And so the work that I've done, when I grew up, everybody wanted to be an organizer. But I remember I mentioned that when I first started with my dad, I worked on the nonprofit side. I always wanted to be an administrator. I wanted to build organizations, right? And so what we've done is we've gone and we've really worked on that on the social enterprise of the part of the movement. The UFW is still organizing, a lot of grassroots work. Our work has continued, but our dreams are a lot bigger. When a lot of people don't know that years before the Delano grape strike, my mom and dad began by offering services. They had a death benefit. You go around and you see people, raising money to bury a loved one with dignity. Farm workers always have that. They've always had that problem, and so they actually developed a death benefit for farm workers back in the 60s. They developed a credit union to help people with consumer credit, just to fix their beat-up cars and stuff, right? They had healthcare, they had clinics, and this was before they started organizing farm workers. Now, what does it have to do with organizing farm workers? Nothing, but it's got everything to do with addressing the needs of working people. And so that's what we've focused on. And so the work that we've done is that, you know, I remember when we started this, we had about 200 units of housing in Fresno. We have 6,000 across the Southwest. We had one radio station. What do we have, 13 radio stations now? We have digital, we have production facilities where we're doing digital broadcasting. We have educational programs. And the idea is that we're just doing a little bit more of what they talked about. But the thing is that when they first founded the founding convention for the UFW, we were looking at some of the resolutions that were passed by these members, right, in Fresno. They talked about that one day farmers that have access to health care, that they have access to decent and affordable housing, that one day there would be a radio station that would speak to the hopes and aspirations of farm workers. And so what we've done is that we've continued that work. It's been magnified, but again, you know, there's new technologies, but the work never changes. You know, when they first started the communications, for example, they had a newspaper that was very popular. It was called El Malcriado. El Malcriado would be like the bratty one, maybe, but they used it as a political organ, and they were bratty in the sense that they would stand up and they would call out injustices, and they'd be irreverent if they had to be. And so they started that, and I remember it was a newsprint thing. And then they talked about that we should have radio. Now, radio isn't newsprint, but it's communications, right? And so now when we take a look at our work, what do we do? You know, we're looking at these smartphones, and we know that, okay, it's digital, it's production of digital media, right? And so again, what does it have to do with newsprint? Nothing, but it's got everything to do with that original purpose of educating and informing and provoking people. And actually, one of the things that I saw was in Phoenix, visiting our social media staff, and they have a studio, you know, with the green walls and lights and everything that they do a number of their productions in, and it's called El Malcriado Studio. So it pays homage to the original, the original ideals of reaching people. So the thing is the work never changes, but we should embrace technology. The other thing is that my dad, he embraced technology. He wasn't afraid of it. I remember in La Paz, many of you have been to La Paz, we had mainframes growing up there, right? He had this idea that he would use technology. I remember I was running the social marketing department, and I had a Sperry 777 high-speed laser printer, right? They could print 7,000 personalized letters, right? Right? There was 4 of them in the state. DMV had 3, we had 1 in Keene, right? We did political work, and we used it for boycotts, and we would support our friends running for office. And so the thing was that he embraced technology because he knew that it helped you be more effective in the original goals that were set out in the organization.
Powerful. I love it.
That was very visionary. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Paul. And now this is for Morgan. Morgan, you have been very successful in the for-profit world, but yet you coach others that profit should not be the primary focus. So that might sound paradoxical to some. So how did you arrive at that philosophy, and how do you help business leaders understand that purpose and profitability aren't mutually exclusive?
Well, I think it goes back to that idea of people do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. But the framework goes back to, in my mind, when you're looking at it, it should always be people before profit. And when you think of that concept based on what you love to do, which for me it's being able to have a mindset of walking in and saying, if we have a vision that everyone sees themselves, regardless of who they are, and if you take the talents that everyone has and you bring them in collaboration, and the power of that collaboration moves into a product or service that people desire, then for me, it becomes, that's where the passion is. Because when you start to look today at the cross-generational movement, going back to Paul in my day, it was kind of, you pick the shovel up, you do the work, and then your productivity is by the sweat of your brow. But today, the kids are saying, look, if I'm gonna come into your organization, I know you sell widgets, but what's your social justice? What are you doing in solving some of these social justice issues? Whatever they might be, because they're global, right? So I think for me, the idea is I want to be able to listen and understand what exactly motivates the person, and then I'll create the vision. And once I get them to see themselves in the vision, and what I use in my office, I love Snoopy, and I'll say, I love Snoopy, so I'll draw Snoopy, and people will look at it, and most people can look at Schultz and understand who Snoopy is. If not, welcome to America, Snoopy, Charlie Brown. And then I'll say, when you look at Snoopy, what color should he be, or she be? What kind of shoes would Snoopy wear? What kind of food would Snoopy eat? And what I say to them is there are all kinds of different talents that bring Snoopy into the real vision, and that's what corporate people have to, in this whole social enterprise, social entrepreneurialism mechanism of where we're going is, people have to see themselves humanely in your vision. They no longer want to be treated as a mechanism. They want to be part of something real. So I think that the thing I try to bring to life and what I believe in as an entrepreneur, yes, profit is vital, because going out, excuse the term, asking for dollars, there's sometimes, as I say, there are two kinds of people. There are the people that you ask for help and they really help you. Then there's the quid pro quo, which is what I used to experience. Well, wait a minute. If I'm going to do this for you, Paul, then what are you going to do for me? But then all of a sudden there's that next thing. It's once you do it for me, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do to you. And then you start going, whoa, that's a whole different narrative. So I think in the social mindset, it's really being able to take on this kingdom behavior of I respect you, man or woman, I respect your gifts, I respect your value and the value you bring, and that value helps Snoopy to become the best, as opposed to a worldly mindset, which is pick up the shovel, dig the hole, shut up and do what I tell you to do, and at the end of the day, I might give you $1. I might give you a couple of cents. And in the business world today, both exist. It's highly competitive, but I choose to believe, and I've lived my 45 years in seeking out people who believe in full collaboration, full respect, men and women, all cultures, because together we create a movement. And I think the other side, it exists and it's ugly, but it's welcome to America.
Thank you for that answer. I think it really gives us a good segue to the next question that I have for you, both of you in fact. So what's the biggest misconception people have about social entrepreneurship, whether that's about nonprofits being inefficient or for-profits or commercial corporations being greedy, and the very idea that you can't do well while doing good? So what's your take, Morgan?
Well, for me, the social entrepreneurism is simply where you walk out the door and you see the culture that you live in, and you need to make social change, right? But yet you come into the business door, but yet the people you sell your products and services to are the very people that need that thing that you see out there. So you can't differentiate the two, even though some businesses say you got to separate church and state. I think they have to work collaboratively. So what I say about that is that you really have to bring human understanding and kindness into the boardroom, and you have to have a voice where your for-profit entity understands that I'm a for-profit entity, but if I don't take the profits that I make and I don't take a percentage of that and put it back into the ecosystem that's feeding me, essentially it rots, right? So that's why today you see for 27 years that I've invested in Leaders in Life. Today we have a touch base of over 40,000 youth. I could tell you B3K, we're part of that, which is creating better paying jobs, but on the other side, going into the social network of the inner city, where I'm teaching classes to Latinos, Blacks, Hispanics, simply, this is really interesting. The people that have talent, that build the walls, that lay the masons, that do all this concrete work, they look like you and me. But yet the subcontractors, which may not look like us, will use them for prime work, low pay, and their margins are high, but they never feed back into the community that's giving them the talent that they have. So the key becomes creating a pathway where they see a for-profit entity demonstrating a kingdom behavior, and guess what it does? It attracts talent. Now, what is everybody looking for today? Talent.
Thank you, Morgan. Paul?
You know, so we come at it from the social impact side, right, as a nonprofit. You know, in our years of doing the work, we spent a lot of time planning. And I remember there was this book that made a big impact on me. It's called Built to Last by Jerry Porras, right, and Jim Collins. And many lessons in there, but they had this concept. They talked about rejecting the tyranny of the or and embracing the genius of the and. And so they said that, just because you're so that we read it, and what came to mind was that just because you're nonprofit doesn't mean you can't use solid business techniques to run a more efficient operation, right? And maybe just because you have a commercial enterprise doesn't mean it can't provide social services. And so when we started looking at things like that, it was really liberating. It gave us the ability to go beyond what our brothers and sisters in the nonprofit world are doing. I use the radio again as an example. We learned to do, we're educational broadcasters. And we learned radio from our brothers and sisters up in Washington State and up in Santa Rosa. They were doing some of the first Spanish language and bilingual programming. And the way they did radio it was cool, but it was Spanish, and it was like Chas and Valle and this and that, right? and it's cool, right? But the people working in the fields, they were listening to banda and stuff, right? And so we had to sit down and we said, okay, well, the people that were playing that with the commercial stations, they didn't do anything other than get listeners, and they would take advertising revenue, but rarely did they do anything in those days, put anything back into the community. And we said, maybe we can go out and we can develop some programming that resonates with people, right? And still remain true to our nonprofit, to our public radio beliefs, right? And so we did that. We changed our programming format, and we did a lot of lively radio. We had shows where we would call out unscrupulous foremen or employers, and we'd put them on the air, and we would lampoon them, right? And we would get calls like, I'm gonna go burn down your station if you don't stop that, and we'd keep on, and then they would come back and issue an apology, right? But the thing is, we did that, and something interesting happened. We had radio, we had educational radio, we had shows about workers' rights, we had shows in the morning called Despierta Ya Campesino. Despierta has a double meaning. One is to wake up, early in the morning wake up, but the other is to open your eyes, right? And so it was Despierta Ya Campesino, and I remember we had shows that would talk about all of these different social issues and campaigns of here in the Central Valley. And in the mid-90s, Rush Limbaugh didn't have the most listeners in the Central Valley. It was Radio Campesina, Pepe's Camilla, and Despierta Campesino we had a 35 market share from Bakersfield to Fresno. And so we showed that you can, right? You can go out and do your work, and you can make it successful. When we did that, then we started getting calls from people like McDonald's saying, how do we get on your radio? How do we get on your radio station? And we were like, well, because we're educational, but why? And then they said, well, do you know the ratings you have? And we were like, yeah, what are ratings, right? And then we looked at it, and then we saw that there was an opportunity, right? The the legal structure that we had educational stations. We saw that, you know, that they give you a broadcast license, but you can't sell advertising, and you can't get involved in political politics. Your hands are tied if you're committed to social change. And so, and actually, I'd like to take the credit, but it was one of the farm workers that were working with us. He says, because we were debating, how do we do this? And he says, what if we were to buy some radio stations, commercial radio stations? And I said, well, we could, but we won't, because we're educational programmers. Yeah, but what if we did? Well, okay. Well, what do you mean? Well, if we own the stations, we, the nonprofit, own the stations, would we decide what the programming is? And I said, yeah, I guess so. Okay. I remember he was very gentle, right? And then, couldn't we then sell advertising? Well, I guess so. Couldn't that help fund the operation? And I was like, oh, son of a gun, right? And so what we ended up doing was, we ended up, as a nonprofit, we began to acquire commercial radio stations, but we couldn't hold them in the nonprofit because it would affect our related income test and all that. So we started, you know, wholly owned subsidiaries. We own 100% of the shares, and I got to admit that Kelly Blanton, right? I remember reading about the stuff he was doing, and I was amazed, right? Right? And so now the work that we do, I'm an educational broadcaster. I just happen to use for-profit stations across the Southwest. The programming is the same, right? And the fact of the matter is, people listening to the radio, they don't know if it's an educational band or commercial band, but what they do know is they know what they want to listen to, and they know what's important to them. And so that's an example of how you can do that, right? You reject this or that, and you say maybe it can be a little bit of both, and it's liberating.
That's wonderful. I mean, both of you leaders have expressed the dual purpose, right, of business, whether you're for-profit or not-for-profit. So again, coming back to you, Paul, and then I'll come to Morgan. So how do you measure success, both in terms of financial sustainability as well as the community impact? And it would be good if you talk about the frameworks or measures that are most important to your stakeholders, and if these have evolved over the years.
Well, you know, that's the $24 question. I mean, on surface, you know, when we look at our housing portfolio, we'll say, okay, how many units of housing do we have? And you can count that. It's easy, right? Yeah. And you can take a look at dollars invested in underserved communities. We've done that. That's easy to measure. We can take a look at the affordability levels that we're impacting. Are people being housed who earn maybe 40 to 60% of the median income? And that's all measurable. But now, how do you measure like how a life has really changed? It's hard to measure. I know that on the radio, we did some strategic planning, and we went out and we talked to everybody, because we do our programming, we have market share, and we feel good about our work, but how do you know if you're really making a difference? And what we learned was that nobody has figured that out. And what we came away with, we said, well, let's sit down and let's take the work we're doing, and let's pick whatever it is, and we're going to measure our success like that. Now, you know, it's not a cop-out. It's just that we haven't figured it out. And the question was, how much time do we spend trying to figure that out, or should we spend our time doing more radio and building more housing? So I choose the latter. Let's go out and do the stuff that's easy to measure. You know, I remember the old arguments, mostly with my mom, about going to school. You don't learn anything. Well, you know, there is a correlation between the number of classes you attend, the hours of classroom work, and what you know, right? You know, how do you measure it? I don't know. I mean, there's pre and post tests, but there is a correlation. And so we kind of feel that there is a correlation between providing housing and having people listen. But the other thing, though, is that it's just not about providing housing. We, for instance, we do multifamily housing for families, and then we do senior housing. We know that we have an opportunity to create little oases in tough neighborhoods, right? But we also know that we have the opportunity, we have tons of kids in our communities. We have the opportunity to provide them something else, and so we've developed, for example, our CISA Learning Centers. And they're really enrichment programs. And so this is on top of the housing that we do that's affordable and that's amenity rich. We say, let's do something for the kids and maybe help them understand that this world is bigger than what they've experienced, and that they may see that there's a place for them in that. Now, how do we measure that? I don't know. I guess we could probably work on it, but I have this idea that let's just go out there and provide those services. Take kids to national parks, take them to museums, right? Take them to universities, right? Bring in tutors that look like them, because those kids are smarter than hell. When they sit there and they look at somebody that looks like their cousin or their brother or next door neighbor, this little light's gonna go on in the head and they're gonna say, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. So that's how we go about our work. It's not very scientific, but I think it's effective.
Hey,
Thank you. Morgan?
as long as it works, brother, that's what works
Yeah.
for me. Well, I think for me in the business world, what we look for is simply, if you take a point and you look out 45 years, the question is, do you have consistent, sustainable growth in what you're doing? And in Teltech's case, we go from 0 to over 20,000 customers today. So we continue to have sustainable growth. But in that framework, I think it's very important, and these are what we call the non-negotiables. We really look for what matters most is deep, trusted relationships, collaboration, trust, and people who like to have fun, like going to Cone or something like that. And so I think that the thing that happens is everything has a life cycle. And there are two elements to business that people really have to understand, and I'll put it in the language that I typically share with youth. All of us, when you go home, even here in the Warren Hall, when you click on the lights, guess what comes on? The lights. And every month for this technology we have, whether it's a cell phone or the lights or your cell bill, you sit down and you just generously write this check, or you electronically send this cash to these people for this service. So there are two types of business. One is transactional, buying meat, bread, that kind of thing. The other is this service where you're constantly paying for something, and for God's sakes, it never ends. It keeps going up, whether it's your house or whatever. So what I try to do in the framework of setting a business up is you need both models. You need to have transactional, and you need to have something that reoccurs so that when you have the highs and the lows, which will happen, that you have this mean that carries the organization through the 45 years that we're in. Most businesses fail because they're transactional. They will say, I'm going to have this widget, and I'm going to keep selling this widget. But if the margin changes via tariff, or if prices go up, or if materials go up, you find that your buying power, depending upon the class that you're selling to, doesn't work. So for me, the constant is, I want to deal with people that like me, that trust me, and I want to treat them fairly. And here's the interesting thing, because we do this in our organization. Annually, I want to exit those people that don't represent that. Why? Because they suck the air out of your organization. They will constantly ask you for service and fight you for pay. An organization, I'll be careful here, it's kind of like you look at large organizations and it's the same as small. And what happens is, most of you, when you look at the aging of a company where it's your 30, 60, 90 days, you typically want to be paid within 30 to 45 days. It's amazing in large corporations who are multi-billion-dollar companies, they will go to small companies and say, you know, we're having cash flow problems. I had a hospital, not Dignity, because I'm chairman of the board of Dignity. Dignity doesn't have a cash flow problem, trust me. But I had a hospital that we support as a company, and I had a CEO call me and say, Morgan, we can't pay your bill because we can't make payroll. This is a hospital. And I go, how is that possible? Because I wanted to learn. He said, well, our insurance company that pays us $400 million annually said they're not going to pay us because they say our medical records are fraudulent. How do you fight that? Okay, here's the narrative. It's a deliberate setup. They put that out there only to come back and say, you know we need to bargain. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna discount that 400 to 350 million and pay you by Friday. That's the deal, or we go back and look at every medical record. So typically what happens, they cave, they pay the 350, and they go back in the boardroom and go, hey, I just made you $50 million on this transaction. That's what typically happens in that space. Now move that into small business, where your margins are very lean, and they play that game with you. And that's the thing that I find that in the business world, it's understanding both of those mechanisms of transactional function and reoccurring function, so you can stay within the mean. That's what's important.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for that. So we have around 10 minutes,
Yeah.
8 to 10 minutes. I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions for our great leaders here.
I only take easy questions, hard ones go to Clayton. Okay?
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
It's not a business question necessarily, but Dr. Clayton, you've been gracious with your time individually, and obviously the history of the movement, Dr. Chavez. There's a place for anger in interactions, but neither one of you gentlemen are bitter. Could you maybe share a little bit about not being bitter, but the righteousness of anger, but not being bitter, and welcoming people from all walks of life as you've gone forward in your interactions?
All right. Paul, you want me to go, or you want me? You want to?
I'll go.
Go, you go.
You know,
Pivot.
I do have a lot of anger in me. You know, I remember I was in high school and I went with my mother to bury my mom's stepfather, my step-grandfather. And I remember growing up, he would come in during the harvest, and Grandpa Pete, and he was a big man, and we'd all line up, all the kids, and he would give us, you know, it seemed like $1 million, it's probably $1 each, right? And I thought he was the biggest and strongest and richest man I ever met, right? And here we are all this time later, and I'm working already in the print shop, right? And so my social consciousness has begun to develop. And I remember going with my mom and my uncles to bury my Grandpa Pete. And he died with nothing. He lived in this little shack, a one-room shack, right? And all I could think of was that this man, this big, strong man that made a lot of people rich, had nothing at the end of his life. And I was pissed off, and I'm still angry about it, right? But the question is, what do you do with that anger? And so I've sat down and said, okay, the way that we're gonna do it is I'm gonna put together the best team of affordable housing folks, and we're gonna create some housing. And I'm gonna challenge our people to go out and do work, and I'm gonna work like hell, right? To create an organization that can remedy some of those things. And so that's how I've dealt with it, right? I haven't sat there and just let the anger consume me. I've used it to motivate me, I used it to motivate me throughout my personal career. And even now, it's still, when I talk to Andres, I make sure that he understands that there's a lot of people that are depending on us. And that we need to go out, we need to work hard, we need to sacrifice. I tease him all the time. I say, you know, mijo, this work-life balance stuff, I don't know. I think that the way you make lasting changes, you gotta work hard, you gotta work harder. He looks at me like, Dad, you're old school. But the thing is that there is something to be said for hard work, right?
Well, for me, ordinary people choose extraordinary humanity in times of suffering. And when I think about that, this is the framework that I use in response to your question. All of us receive the gift of life. It's called air. We're all breathing it now. If you stop breathing, you know the option. But we all get 24 hours a day. And in that 24 hours, it's a choice. It's a choice to be happy. It's a choice to be sad. It's a choice to be angry. And I choose every day to forgive people who are who carry anger. Because what they do, they're taking a portion of their most valuable asset, time, and using it for something that they cannot resolve, right? So when my wife and my family and I, we just got back from DC, and I went to the George Washington Monument for the purpose of visiting that, but also I wanted to go to the slave burial ground. And one of the things I had, honestly, the benefit of it, wasn't expecting it, they had me read basically it was a burial ceremony, and they allowed me to read it and say a prayer over the slave that were buried there. And one of the things that I was talking to a person, didn't really know, it's a stranger, and I said, isn't it amazing when you look at all the people who have died here with all the talent? They built the White House, they built George Washington. They were people with hands and labor, much like even the Hispanic movement, when you look at a lot of the farms and things that were built. And you look at the anger that kind of swells from the ground, Keith, when you look at it. And here's the thing that calmed me and made me go, wow. She said, Morgan, when you think about it, let me ask you a question. If you have an option, you have no reason to be angry. They had no option. And I went, my mind went to a different place. And so what I say to you is, Keith, how I manage my disappointment with what you see going on today, how people are being treated, the way, who cares what government it is? The government is it's just a thing. That's why I keep myself over in the kingdom side of things. You have to really say to yourself, what is your option? Are you choosing to be angry today as something you can't change? Or what if we went into collaboration together and we solved what we could change? That then creates the opportunity to leverage us to move into a space where good things happen. So that's how I manage it. I manage it by recognizing I have the option to choose. I don't judge either way, because some people have a right for their anger. But for me, I choose to create a new space so I can create change. And so that's how I balance it. It's really a question. How do you manage it? I'm not opposing it to you, but how I manage it, I choose to take the space where I can create opportunity and have options, as opposed to black power with nothing in my hand.
Okay, that's great. I think we can have just a minute or two for one last question. We do have some few students here. Would you like to ask something?
What do you think your younger self would say to your current self?
Ooh, wow. I can take it. I got to tell you, that was the hardest question that I saw on that paper, and I'm going to share this with you. I actually have 8 guiding principles. I'll quickly read them to you. Susanna had to retype them I don't know how many times for me, but basically here's what they are. Because if I were talking to my younger self in this environment today, here's what I would say to myself, my children, and you. Here they are. 1, it's the simple things in life where you will find your fulfillment. Number 2, your identity will be found in your kingdom mindset, not your worldly mindset. Number 3, your voice and listening for the wisdom of your superpower, use it for good, not for evil. Number 4, pause and take time for quiet time, reflection, prayer for guidance, forgiveness, mercy, and prosperity in your life and your families. Number 5, your time is your greatest asset, and your health is your wealth, especially as you get to our young ages. Your talents are your gifts. Use them to prosper, help others, serve others, and that will bring meaning to your life. Number 7, seek out deep, trusted, meaningful relationships. Things don't matter. There you will find human kindness, family, and personal happiness. And lastly, have some fun like we're doing tonight, and make memories of yourself and your family, because when your life cycle's over, there's not one thing, glasses or pencil, that'll matter. Thank you for the question. It took me about a month to get that down. But I really appreciate the question because it was very deeply meaningful to me, because I'm married now, I have children who have got their degrees, they're now rising themselves up, I have grandchildren now, and what I find, especially in loving with Paul and Andreas, we have to be able to share our stories and memories so they don't forget those things that we don't want repeated. So I'll defer to my friend here.
You know, well, first, it's hard to follow that list, right? I'm gonna ask you for a copy, but I think I need to take a look.
Oh, I actually brought you one.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have 8 items here.
I love this guy. So if you may ask me, I got it for it.
You know, I remember growing up, and I was just like, this isn't right. You know, I remember thinking that progress wasn't happening quick enough. I was impatient, right? And I remember my dad saying, mijo, well, slow down, right? I mean, you know, he came from a time where he was arrested for sitting in the center aisle of the Delano Theater because it was reserved for whites, right? Now, when I grew up in the 70s, we would have burned it down, right? I'm serious, right? So it was a different
time.
It was a different time, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking that, no, it's not happening fast enough, right? And I was very impatient. And so, you know, I think what I would tell myself is that you got to have this healthy balance between having the patience to understand that it takes time to make lasting change, but you should be impatient that you don't ever give up and you continue it. So I think it would be learning that balance between the two, of having patience, but being impatient about things not changing. And then the other thing is probably realizing that I didn't know everything, and that there was other people with different points of view that have everything. It's amazing. I remember reading once where Will Rogers talked about how he was amazed how smart his dad got as he got older. There's nothing like experience, right? So that would be the second thing, is that understanding that a lot of times, you know, well, we don't always have the right answer, and look around at people around you, and you'll find, you know, if you have more than one head looking at an issue, you'll come up with the right answer.
Yeah, that's good. Love it.
Thank you. This has been awesome. Dr. And thank you.
This was,
Dean
yeah,
Force.
yeah, thank
And
you.
go ahead, yeah.
Thank you. Just what a really amazing, powerful, and inspirational evening. We hope to do more of this, to hear from our community mentors and leaders, because we can't forget. And you're just inspiring to both have started where you started and to be here and still such kind, generous, loving contributors to this community. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oh, get some swag. Appreciate it.
Thank you once again.
Oh,
Yeah, that
thank
was terrific. Oh,
No, I'm good.
are you good?